Hello everyone, welcome to Inside the CCL Season 4, Episode 5. So results of this weekend, pretty interesting actually, and we'll go into a little bit in terms of standings, what it means. So Storm versus Granite Gaming, it's not Episode 4. Storm wins that 3-1. Granite Gaming continues their tradition of only taking a single map in all of their matches. Diamond Hands versus Wildheart, 3-0 in Wildheart's favor. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the Diamond Hand questions for that match. CM, 3-0 Sim. The question continues to be, will Sim even win a single map? We'll talk a little bit about their roster change-up as well. I have some information there to share with you guys. So standings going into week 5. Standings going into week 5. So I promised you guys... Oh, it's because it's week 4. Why did I'm insane. It's just because we had a 1 week break. The 1 week break threw off my entire internal calendar where we are in CCL. So 30k currently at 4-0. Their remaining matches are GG, which I expect them to win. CM will be relatively close. Diamond Hands, it depends on if Diamond Hands changes anything. But realistically, I only expect 30k to lose at most one of those series. So current standings, they're 4-0. They're likely to stay that way and go 7-0 or 6-1. I think it's very unlikely to go 5-2, which means that only Diamond Hands, Chili Mountain, and Wildheart are in a position to potentially displace them from first place, right? Wildheart faces CM next week. That is probably Chili Mountain favored. Wildheart faces Granite Gaming. Pretty much everyone's favorite against Granite Gaming. It's just, I mean, you can be good, but if you don't practice, it just doesn't count for much. And then Wildheart versus Storm. So Wildheart realistically has a chance of also going 6-1. And the reason we need to go through this is because the top 3 people are guaranteed to go to the LAN. And then Chili Mountain has tough matches, right? They have one tough match guaranteed in 30k, and potentially Wildheart and Diamond Hands are tough matches. So worst case scenario for Chili Mountain, they lose all of those, and they end up going 3-4. I think that's very unlikely. But I'd be very surprised if they won all 3 of. I'd be very surprised if they won all 3 of those sets, like really definitively, right? So standing wise, even though Oxygen is, and then Diamond Hands, it's the same dynamic, right? It's really interesting that the teams that are all in the top of the standings are basically also playing each other pretty consistently for the next few weekends, right? So these numbers are going to shift no matter what happens, no matter who wins or who loses. In a lot of cases, these numbers are going to shift around because it's all of the teams in the top playing each other. Whereas you look at Sim versus Granite next weekend, like, that's not moving. I mean, technically that is going to move one of them, right? Because they're both 0-4. That's going to be something that does happen. While Storm versus Oxygen, like, if we lost to Storm, it would substantially change Storm standings. But let's see, who else is Sim playing the week after that? Sim is playing Storm, bottom 3, and then Sim is playing Oxygen, Granite. So it's like it's really interesting to me that the top teams. It's almost like the teams that have played each other have been like relatively easy matches with very few exceptions, and now the top teams are going to be forced to play each other, and that's going to shake up the standings. There is no realistic scenario where Oxygen gets first place, in my opinion, currently, right? Because 30k would have to lose 2 matches and go 5-2. We have to win all our remaining matches and go 5-2. But even if we go 3-0 in all 3 of our remaining matches, we end up with +9 map score, right? And I mean, technically 30k could go down to 4, right? That is, or less than 4. They could go down to 1 because they could go 4-3. I don't think it's realistic. But even if they went 5-2, they would go like up to 13 and then down to 7. So like theoretically it's possible, but it's very unlikely. But it goes to show you how hard it is to calculate standings just in week 4. So that's why normally it's week 5 I do my my look back episode and be like, here's the most likely scenario for the standings, because you can see how week 5 is going to affect so many things, right? If Diamond Hands goes 3-2, then they could drop as low as 5th. And Sim versus Granite Gaming won't change much, but Wildheart versus CM, like, these could literally swap places. And then, let's say Diamond Hands wins, and they end up 4-1. Whichever one of these two teams loses is 3-2. They're going to drop, not out of 2nd or 3rd, but they potentially could drop all the way to 5th. Right? If Wildheart loses 0-3, they'll go down to a +3 map score. Actually, no. If Chili Mountain loses 0-3 to Wildheart, which is unlikely, 3-2, and Oxygen wins 3-0, we'll be 1 map score ahead of them, and we'll actually jump 2 places depending on what happens with the Diamond Hand set. We could get 3-0'd by CM, and then as long as 3-0 last 2 matches, we get top 3 at least. Yeah, there's just a lot of scenarios, right? There's just so many scenarios. Which is why I really want to see the results from week 5 before theory crafting them out too far. Because you can look at every possible scenario, but then assigning probability is a little rough. I think, with the exception of Granite Gaming and Simplicity, the top 6 teams at least all have a chance to take a series off of any other team. And that means that there could be weird upsets. Has anyone 3-0'd Granite Gaming? Wait, 1 game? Forfeit. 1 game? 1 game? Yeah, I don't know if you can 3-0 Granite Gaming. Except for a forfeit, Granite Gaming has never been 3-0'd. They've always taken a map. Oh, that's really funny. So, next week, very exciting. I don't know if the individual matches next week will be terribly exciting. I mean, Wildheart versus Chili Mountain honestly might end up being the best match next week. It should be a banger. But in terms of how it affects the standings, each individual map next week actually matters a lot for pretty much all the top 6 teams. So I think that's really interesting. Game 1. Should this have been AA Falstad? So this was Poikon Falstad. It was picked in the 2-3. So this is essentially double global at this point. I do think it should have been AA Falstad. And the reason I think it should have been AA Falstad is because it's against an Abathur. So there's 1 less body, right? It's going to be a little bit harder to get stacks, but also Abathur doesn't really do a lot to stop just straight up pushing in a lane. Abathur's early game is relatively weak. Even with something like a Rhaegar, right? It's to help with the early game wave clear problem. You're frequently going to be in a lane that's only being attended by a hat. And if you're ever in a lane that's AA Falstad that's only attended by a hat, you just pop your active and there's a dead tower. And then once a tower is dead, it's substantially easier to get the entire wall down, right? And you can just split push your way to victory into the relatively weak early game of the Abathur comp. Also, you're not necessarily going to be able to get your Q stacks up too insanely early. And you can see, like, look at the siege damage, right? He just did more damage than anything else. And in fact, we can go to the advanced stats tab. Doop. Game 1, Cursed Hollow, Falstad. Did he really take no damage for the entire game? That can't be right. Is that right? Let's put that in perspective. This is a 19-minute, 23-second game. He spent 18 minutes and 45 seconds with Tailwind active. You know when that doesn't happen? When your team fight. That has to be wrong. I'll have to talk to Spazzo about that. Is that right? Wait. That's not what I wanted to look at, but that's an insane stat. If that's true, that's an insane stat. I mean, it could be right. But the thing I wanted to go over was damage done to other things, right? Because the way Stats of Storm works is you have damage dealt to each individual hero. He did 6k damage to Genji, 3k damage to Rhaegar, 2k damage to Sylvanas, 0 damage to Abathur, 17,000 damage. By the way, the fact that he did 17,000 damage to Muradin, this is another way to tell if you should have gone AA build. in a given game. If the thing you hit the most in a given game was the tank, you should have been AA build. Right? Even just ignoring the split pushing thing. But damage to other. This is 18k. Right? So other is... it could be a lot of things. It could be summons, I believe. But in this case, it's pretty much... In this particular game, it's pretty much just buildings. Because damage to minions and captured mercenaries was 28,000. Damage to heroes. And so he did a lot of damage to buildings this game. That was his primary job. And whenever your primary job is just to hit buildings, you should be AA build. And then if the thing you can hit safely in a fight is frontline, you should usually be AA build. I'm going to check that, actually. I'm really curious. So it'd be game 1. Yeah. Because if it's wrong, I want to report it to Spazzo as a bug anyway. Although I have a feeling we're going to run into the Diamond Skin Li Ming thing.
Prepare yourself for battle. The battle begins in 1.
The way we're tracking this, by the way, is that Tailwind gives you 15% increased movement speed when you haven't been damaged for 5 seconds. And we can actually see his movement speed right down here. So whenever that goes off, we know he took damage. So we're just going to fast forward a little bit while watching it. So he loses it there. Loses it there. Oh. There you go. Movement speed's right there. See it? 115. I can see it. Cav Ray Vision. So far he's lost it for a grand total of like maybe 7 seconds. I guess technically it has to be at least 10. That's 15.
Here,
20.
gather tribute.
It's always a little bit more, but I'm just assuming every time he loses it, it's 5 seconds of having lost it. Because I mostly want to see if it gets to like a minute-ish, then I know it's not realistic that he had it for that one. Am I misreading the category? Let's see if the in-game thing... Oh, I didn't advance stats this. God, I should have advanced stats this. Maybe it means combined. But that doesn't make sense. Maybe this is just counting its total alive time, and that's the bug. Yeah, that's got to be... That's just got to be a bug. But now I'm kind of curious exactly how often he lost it. So that's another one. It's weird to me that Falstad is the one that's here, by the way. Generally speaking, Falstad should be split from the tribute fight so that you can global in, especially if you have double global. Falstad mid to Haka bottom would be like the perfect laning arrangement here, but instead it's Cassia mid, and that doesn't make any sense.
Well done, friends. Keep up the fight.
Choose a talent.
Good use of Flight on a soak. This is that scenario I'm talking about. Right? Oh, maybe he's rolling for stacks. This is that scenario, but that's even more reason to go AA build. If you have to change your play to something that's slightly worse in order to finish a quest, you should just not have been that build. This is the scenario I'm talking about, by the way, where for a brief moment there, he's completely alone with the tower and he has a wave pushing. Especially if you're E4 for the increased range on your E. You can do a lot.
Careful there. Something's amiss.
That wasn't the safest scenario because Genji was off map, but like it's inevitably going to come up in any game you play where they have a bad rotate and they're not there in time and you can just get a tower for free. And the active level 1 allows you to go tower for free pretty much right from level 1, so it's like, it doesn't take you very long the later the game goes, because buildings, except for core, don't scale at all.
First blood.
I'm impressed.
He actually maintained his active for like a decent amount of time there. Yeah, that's definitely a bug though. I'll reach out to Spaz about that so we can have an accurate assessment. First Abathur sighting in Season 4, right? Actually, you might be right. Because it was also played by Storm on Sky Temple, wasn't it, in the same series? So it was played twice in the same day? I definitely feel like we've seen Abathur before. I have this filtered by date, don't I? I do. I guess I take off the date filter. And then... Yep. First one. For some reason, I thought this happened on Sky Temple. That there was an Abathur pick, but I guess not. Oh, that might have been Master's Clash, actually, where I saw an Abathur pick. Keeping the game separated in my mind, especially when the exact same teams are playing, is somewhat tricky. Wobby versus Storm. Yeah, that's an error with the bot. Can you share your thoughts on the relative power of the hero in the current game balance and whether or not it should see more play? Was this a good example of the hero's strengths? Abathur comps are very strict in a lot of ways. So we give you guys a little history lesson on HOTS overall. For a very long period of time, offlane heroes were largely ranged. Zagara versus Thrall was like a meta offlane matchup. And the reason teams stopped doing that had very little to do with how it played out in lane, and a lot with how it played out in fights. If you couldn't control your flanks with something, and in HOTS that usually has to be a body, you would just get flanked and die, like, a lot. And so these really tanky offlaners had two reasons that they sort of became the standard default comp. One is rotation started happening more, so people would actually gank the offlane frequently. Like, it's hard to imagine now, but there was a period of HOTS in like 2014 where minions were much healthier relative to hero damage than they are now. So pretty much the entire early game, it was impossible to clear waves quickly, which means rotations, if they happened at all, were always very slow by comparison to what we're used to in the current state of the game. So rotation started happening more, and flanks started being a serious problem where people would just get one shot at the start of fights from an angle that they weren't expecting someone to be in, as vision play improved. So you needed something to anchor flanks, or to flank, if that was the goal. So that's why very tanky offlaners became the meta, became a thing, and it wasn't just about how it played in lane. Like if you go look at W build Gul'dan win rates and on Heroes profile and download replays of people playing W build Gul'dan, you will frequently see W build Gul'dan offlaning in Storm League and just winning a 1v1, and no one ever comes to gank the Gul'dan. Like, that would not work in competitive. It just would not. So it's the sort of the difference of experience. Abathur actually can offlane. He can fulfill the vision requirement with really good mind placement, and also allow people to play out of vision and proactively go on people. So this is offlane Abathur. It's very clear. We need to be very clear about what role Abathur is fulfilling in this comp. Naz is a person who I know can play offlane Abathur. You say it wouldn't work, but we see Hammers do it. Hammer has a knockback and an escape. Also, Hammer should probably die more, to be honest. But ganking a Hammer, in some ways, is unlike ganking other heroes. Every hero has a specific way that you need to be ganking them. For Blaze, you need to body block them, right? If you body block a Blaze, for Hammer, you need to accept that Hammer's going to have mines in whatever the nearest bush is. And ideally, you want to be able to go over the wall so that you don't have to walk by the bush. Hammer won't see you coming. Hammer also does need to be body blocked, just like Blaze does. Whereas if you try to body block a Malthael's standard trick is he assumes you're going to body block him. He throws the E where your body block is going to be, pretends to run away from you. When you get in range, he W's to the other side of your body, and now he's not body blocked anymore, and he's just out. If you can, especially if you're Fear the Reaper at 1, if you Fear the Reaper as you hit that W, you're just out. right? That's a very mechanically intensive play for the Malthael player in some ways. But every single hero has a way they have to be ganked. Whether that's you have to be able to CC them, or you have to be able to body block them, or you have to be able to go over a wall, or whatever. You need to interrupt E, right? It's just... yeah, literally, that's a clip of a Tracer solo ganking. And we're actually going to watch this, because it's actually perfect. Right? Mockery actually played this extremely well. Bear in mind, Hammer was first introduced into the competitive meta as a direct counter to Tracer. That's why Koreans started playing Hammer. So this Hammer is like massively overextended in lane. Blink. Sticky Bomb. The slow helps deal with the Z. Sticky Bomb. OP. And then you just body block. That's it. Yeah, apparently that is grub using. So deep flanks, body blocks, some way to deal with the Z. Every hero. And basically, in competitive, you shouldn't even try to gank a hero if you don't have the right tools. Right? Unless they're massively overextended. In which case, it's okay if the time to die is longer because your time to chase is longer. So that's sort of a fundamental thing. Game-wise. So offlane Abathur can kind of do the job that you would expect the Nikki Bruiser to do in terms of controlling vision a little bit with the mines. Obviously, it's really hard to gank an Abathur. People think Abathur is worse after the changes because of the globe thing. I actually think Abathur might be better after the globe changes because he never has to put his body in any danger. He can just cycle hats and never miss soak, which is kind of insane, right? Before, Abathur had to physically put his body in some danger, and with a good rotation, you could potentially get a pick on the Abathur, and that sort of would temporarily disable the enemy team's comp. Now he just plays safely with his body and cycles hats, and he never, ever, ever misses any soak in any lane. Abathur can always double soak, and can very nearly triple soak, especially with the change to the small globes. He'll only miss soak a given minion occasionally, and the enemy team can counterplay that a little bit, but it's not easy and it's not consistent. So if Abathur was good before, he should be good now. The reason we honestly have seen less Abathur play is his nerf that caused his overall healing to be reduced by like 70%. Because solo support Abathur used to be a thing, and you could essentially double support with Abathur, and it would solve the macro problem. But losing 70% of his healing was a lot. But it also constrains the draft in other ways. Like, Abathur is really good with specific heroes. Yeah, now he's even better at soaking deep in enemy territories, right? So Abathur doesn't help you set up a win, necessarily. But now, currently, Abathur is even better when you're winning than he was before. So that's kind of interesting. Season 1 auction demonstrated that you really don't necessarily even need a clone in your comp for Abathur to be good. Monstro is a perfectly fine heroic. And it actually can do a lot. On average, if you don't micro the Monstro at all and just spam it on cooldown, it will do, on average, a fort's worth of damage to buildings. Which doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a fort by itself. It just means that, on average, it will do a fort's worth of damage. So, like, it can get half a wall by itself, and then it'll die, and then you push it. It pushes another minion, it contributes like a quarter of a fort's damage, then it helps get keep wall. But it opens up the lane more quickly than the lane would be opened up otherwise. So that's important. And if you do have clones, like Rhaegar is a good clone, Genji's a good clone, Zeratul is a good clone. I'm missing Jane is a good clone. There are only like maybe 7 or 8 heroes that I'm like, I want clone over Monstro. But when people thought that clone was the only heroic, you were restricted into picking only one of those 7 or 8 heroes. And with Monstro being viable, you're actually not. It's just a question of, is Abathur good into the enemy team comp? Now, Abathur's not good into this comp, by the way. Dahaka will just shove a lane, right? If the lane is unattended, Dahaka just shoves it to the point where, and this is actually something Wubby invented. If you have this level 7 talent, Feeding Frenzy, Q on Dahaka just does a straight up enormous amount of damage. It's not even that it's a CC at that point. It just does a lot of damage. And you know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say it only works on heroes. Or whatever. You know what it works on? You know what this nuke of 160 damage works on? Buildings. So a Dahaka who has the Feeding Frenzy level 7 and is just running it down a lane will actually queue buildings and just start nuking them. And you run out of mana, whatever. You just back in Z. Like, it doesn't matter. And I actually picked that up from watching Wubby replays from HGC. And guess who's playing Dahaka this game? It's Wubby. Yeah. Abathur was probably not a good pick specifically into the Dahaka Falstad. Abathur is a global, in a sense. You can make an argument that Abathur is the single best global in the game because he has the shortest cooldown on his global. But you don't match something like a Dahaka with an Abathur. It's questionable. So I would not say this was a good example of the hero's strengths. It seems like most CCL players, or CCL Dahaka players, like to pair their enhanced agility with Lurker Strain rather than either of the Essence Generation talents level 4. How detrimental, if at all, is the slower quest completion? How much flexibility do you feel Dahaka's builds have? So this is an interesting question, and you'll actually legitimately get a different answer, depending on who you ask. For instance, Cure says you should only ever go Elongated Tongue. And the reason he believes you should only ever go Elongated Tongue is the 20% increased range will just randomly win you the game, like 1 game in 5. Post 16, you'll just get a really long range tongue, drag someone into your team, they're dead, you're now 5v4, you can secure the map, and the game will inevitably end. So, if 20% of the time you can pick a talent and you just accidentally win the game, that's a good talent. You should probably take that, like, fairly often. That's Kira's argument. And then there's, like, Nintori, who believes in adaptation and thinks that if you can just live inside the enemy team, then your team will eventually find an opportunity to win the fight. As long as you don't die, why wouldn't that work? I do think Dahaka's builds have a lot of diversity and a lot of playmaking potential. The fact that you can use Lurker Strain's microstun plus the slow to secure your own Q, so you can turn Lurker Strain into something rather than using it purely defensively, you can use it aggressively, is kind of insane. That's a really big bump for the talent's viability. If you are going to play that style of living inside the enemy team, you pretty much need Hero Stalker. So I don't ever want to see Enduring Swarm plus Symbiosis not paired with Hero Stalker. That just doesn't make any sense to me. You are a much less threatening hero. Or the windows where you're threatening are much longer if you don't have Feeding Frenzy, because you don't have the CDR. Right? I've never seen one who collects, but I find it quite effective. One who collects is primarily good at helping you do mercs. If Dahaka is your best merker, you probably have a draft issue. This is a talent that I would consider in like SL, but if I felt forced to pick this in competitive, I would basically think my draft was awful. And it could be. You could mess up draft. Crutching on bad talents, or crutching on talents you shouldn't be picking in competitive to fix a bad draft is less than ideal. And you're not gonna have a lot of practice time doing that. But I think Dahaka, except for Paralyzing Enzymes, which actually was picked once in CCL and actually is 100% win rate, I actually think every single talent Dahaka has is pretty viable. But sometimes I think the drafts that would necessitate a different build are just unlikely to ever happen in competitive, right? People are drafting Dahaka for a specific build. I also don't think it's a big diff that Essence or Enhanced Agility doesn't get finished till relatively late, because it's not like you don't get the benefit till it's finished, right? It slowly ramps up the benefit over time. If you're finishing this at like level 16 or something, right as team fights are really becoming the win con of the game and you need to be zooming at people, I think that's fine. You like that 4 on D-Shire? Because your team doesn't come to help you clear the bruisers when the enemy team takes them. Wouldn't it be so much better, though, if your team just, like, rotated the 3-man up and you took over bottom until the hards were cleared and then you swapped back? Oh, God. Yeah, if you actually need to do camps as Dahaka, it's absolutely a talent that you should pick. If you're on Garden and no one else in your team can do camps, 100% pick the talent. I just don't think that should ever be an issue in competitive. You should have someone who's good at doing camps, and Dahaka should be on lanes. Not least because, especially in competitive, you should be thinking, can we invade, whenever you have a global like Dahaka? So you don't want Dahaka on a camp and then has to leash the camp.
The battle begins shortly. The gates shall
So Sylvanas was not considered competitively viable very much. She was sort of a niche cheese pick before her rework in 2018. After her rework in 2018, she was considered briefly in HGC scrims that happened like directly after BlizzCon, but before HOTS got canceled. Maybe the most meta DPS. And her overall damage increased by an average of 7%. But that 7% is contingent, 100% contingent on having 3 stacks of her trait on a target. So she went from... And small shifts like this can happen. Lucio was considered the most meta healer in the entire game and lost, like, he got a patch where his only change was he lost 5% of his HP, and he was literally unpickable. He went from OP to unpickable on a 5% difference. So a lot of people think that the difference in stats necessary for a hero to be completely busted is something like enormous. Like they have to do 30% more damage than anyone else or something. And it's actually not. Literally a 3% change can substantially move the needle, depending on what stat it is, the role of the hero, the hero's kit. Sometimes a 3% stat boost wouldn't move the needle at all. Like if you gave Abathur 30% more health, is that going to change Abathur's win rate? Probably not, right? Like for some heroes, some stats matter and some stats don't. But obviously for any damage hero, how much damage they do is really important. So the question here is, does Nasmus die if Sylvanas is percent damage at 1? And it's actually the wrong question. Before you ever look at talents, the first thing you have to look at is, was the base kit of the hero executed correctly? So Insane Stun here. And Azerite dismounts himself voluntarily before he's in AA range, and he E's directly at Nasmus. Now the problem with this is that E is going to do less damage because don't have 3 stacks yet. From 0, it takes... So Sylvanas has an attack speed of 0.67? 0.6... Yeah, 1.67. So from 0 stacks, right, assuming your auto isn't already on cooldown, it takes 1.2 seconds to get 3 stacks. So ideally, what Azerite would have done here is walked until he was in range, autoed Nasmus until Nasmus was at 3 stacks, and then push all your buttons. Your auto attack actually flies through the air faster than your Q and your W do, so you can actually auto twice and then hit your buttons. And if you time it right, everything will come out after. But he actually E's like this, and this is something you could do if you already had Festering Wounds from 7. Not Festering Wounds. Spreading Plague? What's it called? Festering Wounds. No, that's right. That just didn't sound right. This is something you can do at level 7. So this is also a weird dynamic that can happen where you'll see someone make a play that is just objectively wrong, but it would be right if they hit a different talent. And this has happened in CCL games, even when someone like didn't take a talent for the entire game. Like this has happened when in Season 1 several times where people took W7 and they would still E at people and then immediately push all their buttons, expecting to have stacks. Like it's muscle memory, right? Yeah, Spreading Plague is the Mal'Ganis Burning Rage on 7. So like this is just wrong. And you can see most of his damage is done before he ever gets 3 stacks. He gets the crit kicker like 3 times. He gets 5 crit kickers. Bear in mind that Sylvanas should have 5 crit kickers from Withering Fire, 1 per auto after the thing, and then each W should give its own crit kicker. Right? So Nasmus lives with 244 health. Sylv did 1,422 damage to him. Blaze did 330 damage to him. Now, the reason that Overwhelming Affliction doesn't matter here is because the target has to be slowed, and an unstoppable target cannot be slowed. So as soon as Nasmus is spinning, OA would have done literally nothing, right? There's an argument that if Blaze had oiled him, he would have been slowed, and you could have gotten probably 2 autos off of OA1. And OA doesn't care if you have stacks or not, right? OA just cares that the target is slowed. So even if someone else is slowing him, that's fine. Doesn't matter. So if Blaze had oiled, which he didn't, so he wasn't slowed, he was just stunned. But if Azurite had not dismounted, had walked up, autoed 3 times, E'd this way for the chase so that his Q didn't get disjointed, right? Because you would have to account for the fact that, of course, the kill target's going to spin away. Nasmus absolutely dies there with Might of the Banshee Queen, right? Maybe he dies if it's OA and Wubby slows instantly so that every single auto has the % damage. But it's not a question of the talent there. It's just a question of you have to respect the way Sylvanas' kit works. You don't push your buttons on something that doesn't have 3 stacks on them. You just don't. One of the primary reasons that Festering Wounds is such an insane talent for the way Sylvanas' kit works is it eliminates this consideration. You don't have to play the minigame anymore. You just throw your E at people and then you can push all your other buttons. It also allows you to get really insanely large arrows because you can Festering Wounds hit multiple people with your trait, and then Wailing Arrow becomes like this massive nuke. Right? It takes a very mechanically disciplined player who's constantly tracking stacks to play any other talent at this tier. So Might was actually the talent most likely to result in a kill there because of the Unstoppable. Anytime someone has an Unstoppable, it makes OA a little bit worse. But talents are the last thing you should look at. Execution is the first thing you should look at. Just go quest on 1 and still practice getting on stacks first. Honestly, like, if you want to get really good at Sylv, that's really good advice. Because it only takes like 100 to 120 stacks. In the worst case scenario of full Q build, assuming you're going to get maximum value out of all of the resets from Windrunner and get like 15 Qs on the same target, it takes like 170 stacks. But Nick had a game in Masters Clash a couple weeks ago where we were into double support, which I think if you're Sylvanas in double support, you should always be going W1. He ended the game with like 230 stacks. Right? And it only takes 100 to 120 stacks to be more damage than most of the realistic scenarios for either of the other level ones. So if it's just about damage, and just about learning the hero specifically, just always go stacks. That is honestly really good advice. Storm wins the final team fight, but should they have given the objective and played for 20 instead? Yeah, my assumption, by the way, for that number is I don't care about spread damage for the most part, unless a comp is specifically playing for spread damage. So when I say W at 100 to 120 stacks is more damage against a target, I mean a single target. CPX, you can't be results oriented. That's like saying drawing to an inside straight is always correct in poker because you got an inside straight this one time. So here's what you have to ask yourself. How long does it take to get from 17 to 20? If you're soaking all 3 lanes on a 3-lane map, how long does it take to get from 17 to 20? The answer is like on average 2 minutes and 40 seconds. If you want to think of it that way. I prefer to think of it in terms of numbers of waves. So on average, it's 14 to 15 waves. But you have to consider, like, when keeps are dead, it's much harder to soak every single lane. Oh, it's the next one. Oh, it's this fight. Yeah, bottom seed. Actually, should they have tried to end on core? Is this a meaningless discussion? Could you guys have just gone core here? 5v3. You get mid keep instead. Could you have just wrapped here? When was this call made? So you're at the wall already. No, there's no way. I mean, 34 seconds. No. That's not worth it. Okay, so now it's really interesting, right? Because in this position, Granite Gaming literally cannot get 20 before the next seed spawns. And if you soak 20 and get the next seed, that's fine. But there's like, Brandon's gonna have to deal with you guys being 20 and pushing no matter what. In a sense, this is the best fight Granite can get, but look how bad the positioning is. So the things you look at when you're deciding should we take a fight in HOTS are do you have advantages? Position advantages can be cooldown advantages. They can be positional advantages. They can be wave advantages. They can be resource advantages, and by that I mean like just health and mana. If you notice that like the enemy support is completely out of mana, and everything else is even, you should just be like, let's go, let's go, let's fight that. So positionally, this is way better for Storm. They have a well up here, right? They have this tap. They have easier control of this entire arc. Granted, Gaming really only has one path that they can really retreat through, and it's the same path they have to walk through. And if the path you have to walk through and the path you have to retreat through are the same, your team is inevitably going to clump. And if you're clumped, that can be punished in so many ways. In this case, it can be punished by Shockwave, Hogger Spin, Chromie W's, Tychus Grenades, anyone going in anywhere near your team with a Lightning Shield from Rhaegar. Like, there's just like look at the difference here. They're all funneling through this choke, and Storm is like able to play from two separate sides. Storm could be playing from a third side too here. Like someone could walk over here, and they could be playing from three separate sides. And look, Lobber just walks up here. So there's an all in here by two members of Granite Gaming, but look, Lobber just walks up here and like prevents some of the follow up from existing. He doesn't even do anything. And he finally cocoons someone. But like now this is a 5v3 essentially. Like positionally, ignoring the cocoon, this is basically 5v3 because these people cannot help. Now, I think fighting there was fine for Storm. I think you can make an argument that having a Hogger soak 20 while stalling the seed was the safer play. I think you can make that argument. Because I think that with Chromie just standing over here, she can stall this seed for a long time. And then Tychus, like if she misses, Tychus can throw a grenade. So I think you can make the argument that Storm could have soaked 20 while stalling it and then gotten the same fight, but 20 versus 17. But I think positionally, that was a really good fight for them to be taking. They did have a cooldown disadvantage. A lot of their ults weren't up. But yeah, Lobber said it. He thinks position is better than 20. There are a lot of people who are going to argue that having the better position is better than having a talent 2 advantage. Well, Granite dived in, right? But like, no, because if they're looking at stalling only, there would be someone soaking a lane. Hogger's like not even. Hogger's maintaining his rage on the camp, right? If they were playing for 20, Hogger would be over here soaking this wave because it's the closest wave. Could Chromie have done anything better this fight? I'm not sure exactly when it started as the observer was watching their section of the fight. I mean, Chromie backed up and 3 spells. I don't, like, control the... Arguably, this could be further down, right? To control the collapse a little bit more. You missed some damage, but the Sands is perfect. I don't know. I don't think you really could have played that much better. Like... You didn't put yourself out of position, and you threw all your spells. Playing Chromie's not that difficult. It's literally just don't put yourself out of position and try to throw your spells on CC targets. And you get the time trap on the retreat. Yeah, all of that seemed fine. We finally saw someone pick Neosteel Coating. How much value did the talent get? Neosteel Coating prevented just about 4,000 damage this game. And bear in mind, it's a level 13 talent. So, like, when did they hit level 13? They hit level 13 at, like, 7 minutes, 56 seconds. And the game was over at 19, I believe? It's a 15-minute game. Is that good or bad? Well, you gotta consider that, like, if a level 1 talent does 4,000 damage, that's a pretty shitty level 1 talent, right? Because it's not that great. But if a talent with a 1 minute cooldown, and Neosto coding obviously isn't a 1 minute cooldown. I believe it's 45. I'll make sure I'm not lying to you guys. It's 30 seconds. So if it only saves your life exactly one time, right? That's pretty insane. And honestly, in this game, the Tychus was not under much pressure. So if it only saves your life for one time, I do think it actually did save Maka's life exactly once. And like it prevented like 3,000 of its 4,000 damage in that single activation. It's pretty good. How often does a talent need to save you to be good is a really interesting question. Because there are talents that are considered must-pick in competitive that on average will do something once every other game. How well was Bunker used this game? Placement, timing, viability for allies, etc. If so, how could its usage have been improved? This is so. The worst games to look at are the games where someone is massively behind. Right? Because when you're massively behind, you're frequently forced to use talents in suboptimal ways just to like try to survive. And Bunker is something that requires a ton of team coordination. So we're going to go back to this Bunker. So here the Bunker is literally just, hopefully he can get in. Hopefully. Oh, he couldn't get in? That's a shame. And then Lubby ends up dying to the his E getting redirected by Loot Horde, which is a nice little tech. It's really good to do into Blaze, actually. Not the first time we've seen that in CCL. I think last time we saw it was from Zergling, actually. So, like, several Hogger players are now doing this. It's a really good thing to know about the matchup, that if Blaze tries to E in or out, you throw a Loot Horde in front of him, it will not work. So Bunker usage this game wasn't great, but that's because they were losing. Whereas in the next game, when Storm was winning with Blaze, Bunker usage was pretty good. A new Hogger player has appeared. How did Nasmus perform? Please rate with the concrete Hoggo metrics you've outlined in previous streams. Nasmus's Hogger is fine. It's always been a little inconsistent, which, to be fair, everyone's Hogger is very inconsistent when they first start playing the hero. I think it takes a couple hundred games to get really consistent at the hero. But in this particular game, Nasmus performed fine. You see he was also doing some interesting tech, right? With the Loot Horde. Good positioning there. He was getting wall stuns. He got some okay pummels. Nothing insane. Nothing like game-winning. But he did a lot. Moving on to game 3. I'm going to show... I think game 3, the very first Bunker usage, actually was really good. I wanted to highlight it. It's right around here. Yeah, this one. So look how nice this is. Lauber is relatively immodal. CPX, you actually have statistically the best performance on Hogger, and I don't just mean like win rate. CPX's game on Hogger on Curse so far this season is the best. Like it's the best camp timings so far. It's I believe the highest damage no control that happened. It's actually so look at this. Anub goes, and Naz goes the other way. So Lauber, who's relatively immobile, has to go towards the only actual out. He has to. That's just where he has to go. Nasmus has Bunker. So Nasmus, knowing he has Bunker, takes the more dangerous exit. You don't want to both go this way, because then you'll both get hit by E, right? And then he counter engages, which ended up being bad because of the Gorge. A little bit of miscommunication there. And then that's not a great Bunker, right? Because the Wailing Arrow meant he was perfectly safe. But that's sort of the pattern that you do as Blaze. And theoretically, if this Gorge hadn't happened, Dahaka would have probably been body blocked by the bunker. So Dahaka would have been stuck here if Nasmus immediately hops out and stands right here. Right, so the intention of this bunker was good, but the communication with and intentions from Labber were obviously pretty poor. But that's a really good way to use bunker. Generally, the ideal bunker usage is somehow, whether it's because you went left or because you flanked, come in from behind an enemy team, preferably behind an enemy team's engage. E in, get a stun, bunker. Anyone that is being engaged on can now get in the bunker safely, and probably pretty easily because someone is CC'd, and the bunker prevents the enemy team from retreating. That is like the ideal bunker. And if it hadn't been for like a miscommunication, that would have been a nearly ideal bunker. But if you're just forced to like straight up E in to something and then bunker just to not die, that's less ideal. Remember when bunker had 5 more HP? It was so broken. Remember when you could instantly get in bunker? That was broken. Storm placed a lot of priority on top 4. This game was still constantly up there. To pressure out the Blaze, could you elaborate on this strategy? I feel like the default is the 4-man bot ARAMs to get bot 4. Yeah, actual bunker hopping closing. People probably don't remember this, but you could stutter step bunker. Because bunker was an instant channel to get in, and it had no cooldown on getting in and out of it. You could auto attack, get in the bunker, hit Q, get out of the bunker, auto attack. It literally replaced stutter stepping. And people had to practice that. So if you were if you got 5-man bunkered, you would be getting autoed by all 5 heroes who had 25, if not more armor, because armor stacked at the time. So they could get, and then you would also be getting queued on CD. Like it was this enormous burst tool as well as being a team-wide ice block that gave armor. It was actually so ridiculously overpowered. So the reason people prioritize bot lane on Towers of Doom, there's 2 reasons. One, there's 2 sapper camps down there. And the sapper camps represent 6 potential shots whenever the fort is converted. But also the rotation is clunky. Like if you look at the map, there's this wall here, and then there's these 2 paths up with no cover. This rotation is relatively clunky. Whereas the rotation from top to mid is a little bit easier. There are more bushes, so you can bush gank, but generally if someone's off the map, you're just like, obviously, they're bush ganking, because you can see them bottom, right? There's not a lot of places to hide. Because there's not a lot of places to hide bottom, if someone goes missing, you just assume they're ganking the offlane, and the offlaner then plays safe, right? And it's really hard to make the only way to rotate, if someone's watching this open area here, the only way to rotate for a gank is to go all the way into your base, go up and over, unless you can go over walls, in which case you can walk to here, go over this wall, and then come out mid-gate. Right? That's why the prioritization frequently is bottom. But if you have a 4-man that doesn't win, and you have a hero like Chromie who's capable of anti-siege, where she can just sit behind her gate and clear waves really safely, so that the speed of siege is really slow, you can just 2-man top. We saw Diamond Hands do this, right? A couple weeks ago, where they had Falstad, and Falstad just played top mid the entire time with the offlane, and they just held bottom. And you can see Chromie Brightwinger bottom, Muradin's roaming, and Sylvanas is so everyone has like a job. And anytime you have a losing 4-man, you should definitely consider this. I don't know if their 4-man is losing, but they're also not going to be able to siege into a Junkrat. Right? So if you can't siege, what's the point of being bottom at all? I also don't really think that shots matter, personally. I don't think shots matter on Towers of Doom. I think building damage matters. Because if you just scale, win a team fight, and convert all 6 buildings, the game will end. Right? We've seen that happen in competitive. I mean, it's a famous game, right? But Gen G versus Ignitas, it happened in Mid-Season Brawl. I will give an altar to get a tower pretty much all the time. And depending on comps, that strategy can be wrong, right? But on average, I don't really think that it is. And you really do have to look at the comps you have and determine what your win condition is and how well the enemy team sieges, how much anti-siege you have, what your mobility on the map looks like to decide what your lane should be. And sometimes you're going to prioritize top. That happened in HGC too. We won a game, when I was coaching GFE, we won a game on Towers of Doom where we had a gray main top pretty much all game, and all he did was run down the building. And, one of the questions the interviewer asked us, is that normal? And we were like, well, it's not normal, but we did it. But you guys got all 6 keeps after a 5-man team wipe? Yeah, because they had scaled, right? They drafted a comp that was good late game, and even though they lost early game, they scaled to the late game, got a comp, and because they had been shoving lanes all game, they were able to 6-cap. If all of the walls on all of the forts had been alive, they wouldn't have been able to 6-cap. But part of their scaling was making sure lanes were always shoved, which got chip damage, which eventually got all the walls, which allowed them to kill all the buildings. The building advantage is not a one and done thing. You don't either have a building or not have a building. If you have 3 forts at 10% health and all of your forts are healthy, but you're down on shots, you're winning the building advantage. Because if the enemy team makes any mistakes ever, you can convert all 6 buildings instantly. Is Zingtoss versus Genji? Actually, I can show you guys. It's really easy to find. You can never scale for 100% team win. That's not true. There are definitely cases where you can scale to a team comp that is always going to win at 20. It's just a question of getting there. In fact, there was an entire meta where Nazmus was, or not Nazmus, where Nazeebo was first banned in HGC, and that was the entirety of the meta. Was if Naz got to 20, he literally always win. They split like crazy. It's not really fair to say they split like crazy. They just, everyone did the most efficient thing. So look at the waves, right? Mid is pushing in. Ideally, top would also be pushing in, but they're against a fall stat, you can't have everything. Varian has Banner 20. Banner 20 is straight up one of the most overpowered 20s in the entire game, by the way. Especially when you pair it with something like a Li Ming. Because not only are you now going to out-sustain... Up to this point in the game, Stukov could not out-sustain Malf. After this game, after this 20, Stukov out-sustained Malf. It was a brief fight, but like it completely changes the dynamic of all the breakpoints of the fight. This comp has far better 20s. Far better 20s than anything on this team. Instant bunker, by the way. Snitch literally D's to the bunker and gets in, and you don't even like see the channel. That's stage 1 of this fight, where everyone pops pretty much every cooldown. Rich greeds for the camp here, and they actually... So now they don't have cooldowns, right? Now they don't have all of these insane cooldowns, but you know what's back up? You guys know what's back up? Banner's back up! Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Banner is back up. That kill doesn't happen without Banner, by the way. When I did this, when I went over this fight for HCC Rundown back in the day, Tournament Realm still had a patch where you could actually watch the replays for MSB. So I actually watched the replay using my stats work. And if Banner 20 doesn't exist there, and you don't get the CDR from the 20, that kill doesn't happen. And here's the thing about 5-man team wipes. Here's how you can guarantee a 5-man team wipe. Draft Li Ming. It sounds obvious, but it's not. When you have resets abilities, resets are the one thing that's actually going to secure you more than one kill. HHE had a comp. You probably don't remember this, but Brightwing used to have a talent that reset her polymorph if a target was polyed within a certain duration afterwards of the target being killed. And they actually had Genji, Li Ming, Brightwing, and all three of those got a reset. So HHE, pretty much anytime they won a fight with that comp, got a minimum of 3 kills. Yeah, they played it on BOE. If they got 1 kill, they were guaranteed 2 more. So a 5-man team wipe for some comps is like an exceptional event, but specifically at the HCC level for Li Ming comps, especially Li Ming plus Genji, it was considered standard. Like, you were very likely to, at a minimum, get 3 kills anytime you got 1. So here's 1 kill, and then they just run it down. And they're trying so hard. That's 2 kills, and that kill. Notice how that kill on Rich over here by Snitch gives Poik this kill on reset on Falstad over here. Use Gust? No, you don't get the objective there. That's literally the altar ends the game. But see, this fort was low. And here's the thing to really understand about how good Dig was at the game. This wasn't talked about on comms. So a lot of people make the assumption that this split afterwards was called on comms. It wasn't. Literally, the call was, I think, something like, get as much as you can. And everyone went and did the thing that they were best at. So Genji has the most mobility. Genji goes farther away. Li Ming, already next to the fort, goes straight to the fort. Stukov, mid, has the ability to clear that wave, so he sees the waves are going to stack up. Blaze goes straight to camp. JPL cuts this wave. By cutting this wave, it makes wave pressure mount in the lane. It's not that he clears it very fast, but he can just hold it here and tank it. And everyone, like, this wasn't like discussed in detail. It was literally just everyone do as much as you can. But this would have been absolutely impossible if there hadn't already been damage done to the buildings beforehand. So it's a really important dynamic of towers. They lost because, I mean, they didn't just lose because they didn't wait CDs. They also had positional mistakes. They didn't control vision exactly the way they needed to. They didn't change their arc over to the right-hand side once they started doing the camp. There's a lot. It's never one thing. Washed or not? Chapter 3. Better, same, or worse? Are Granite leveling up in any facet? Rotations, draft mechanics, etc.? No, they're about the same. It's really hard for a team to level up when they're not practicing. Like, practice is how you improve. If you don't practice, you're not improving. You're going to be basically the same. And they were basically the same. Not too surprising. We saw Nasmus instead of Swamp this weekend for Storm. Do you feel this lineup was swapped there to their advantage? Yes. Nasmus was on vacation. I think the plan was always to have Nasmus, actually. So Nasmus is apparently on vacation. And do I think Nasmus is better than Swamp? Yes. Where are these questions coming from? They come from a Discord channel in the Nexus Schoolhouse Discord, where people are free to post questions as the games are happening throughout the weekend, and then I go in and answer them. And that is it for Storm versus Granite Gaming. GG to Storm. Swamp was also at a festival. Yeah, I mean, I think they're Nasmus is a better offlaner than Swamp is. I don't know if Swamp adds anything extra to the team in terms of shot calling or drafting or ideas like that. But I would also argue that Nasmus is also better at those things. There's a reason I first picked Nasmus in Season 1 when CCL was a draft. I mean, it's Prison then Nasmus, because Oxygen had the back half of the Snake block, so it was a two-man pick. But how did Triple Bruiser look for Diamond Hands? Would a different melee character that is more aggressive, Imperious, Thrall, or Maev have been better over Blaze or Dahaka? Swamp's a decent drafter. Swamp's, I mean, I haven't seen him draft that much, so I don't want to comment on it. Nasmus was a drafter for one of his HGC teams. And I've worked with Nasmus for 3 seasons. I'm actually really sad not to be working with Nasmus anymore. Nasmus is by far and away one of my favorite people to work with ever in the hot scene. Nasmus is very good at drafting. He understands a lot of the things you have to be really cognizant of in drafting that aren't just like, oh, this hero's good, let's pick this hero. Triple Bruiser. So this isn't... When you have triple frontline, where none of the frontline damages are particularly high, right? So Dahaka did 11k hero damage this game, less than Anduin actually. That's pretty insane. Muradin did 15k, Blaze did 31k. Why did Nasmus leave Oxygen? With the way Season 4 worked, where teams could essentially pick themselves and then find an org that wanted their exact roster, it was very difficult to pick up a team piecemeal. And we were forced to pick up an entire roster, which didn't leave any room for Nasmus. We actually considered having Nasmus be the 6th, but that didn't work out either. Sadly. I should go over all this in my episode 0, which currently is called episode 1, but should be called episode 0, rosters of Inside the CCL, which I believe is on my YouTube channel. If anyone wants to go look at that. Yeah. So if you have low damage frontline, you need to have a very high damage backline that the low damage frontline is in some way enabling / protecting. And frequently low damage is also an indication that they were just maybe macroing all game, or they were behind. So you have to look at the context of the game, and obviously they were behind, right? Level 23 to level 20, 10 takedowns to 4. Curious about the XP breakdown, actually. Maximum possible minion soak. Looks like they were just soaking all game. Even when they were losing, they were soaking, which you should be doing, to be fair. I don't think it was necessarily, because the thing you're replacing here, right, the way they picked it, Blaze could have been the off lane, but the way they picked it, where they picked Dahaka last, it would have been Dahaka would have had to be a higher damage something. So they would have been giving up a global advantage in order to have a different frontliner. Thank you, Greffer. Appreciate it. So I don't know. I don't know if having a Maev there is better than having a Dahaka when they're giving up the global advantage. I think if this is the plan, one can make an argument that this has to be Vala. Or maybe Cassia. Right? Sylvanas is not exactly a hero who's an unconditional hypercarry. Sylvanas has a lot of conditions for hypercarrying, including what team comp you're up against, and particularly AA Sylvanas. So this is Overwhelming Affliction, Remorseless. This should be W7 since they have to play for sustained fights. Into Joe Blinds is nearly unplayable. So deciding to go for Hypercarry Sylvanas into double blinds and into this many unstoppables, right? Because Genji has unstoppable frames. I guess iframes on X-Strike to remove slows. They have Hogger has unstoppable frames. Joe has an unstoppable and blinds. Even Greymane has unstoppable frames on Go for the Throat, although this was bullet. It's a little bit awkward. I think after the Sylve pick, they had to go for double ranged, because you can't just like pick a range that's already countered for the build you want and then build that comp around that build. That doesn't make sense. Which is why I keep saying Sylvanas has a lot of builds. And honestly, Sylvanas has so many builds that I don't think anyone but a Sylvanas one-trick would be able to pick them correctly in 100 games out of 100 games. Like, you would have to dedicate all of your practice time to each individual Sylv build, which for competitive players is not realistic, because if anyone got that good at Sylv, it would just be permabanned against you every single game. Except for maybe Barbed Shot, every single Sylvanas talent is viable, and they're all going to be viable in sometimes some weird combinations. W build into Tychus Greymane. I have not talked about them yet. I talk about them in order. And since the Oxygen versus 30k was the last series, it will be the last thing I talk about. Barb Shot is the best Immortal race. That's the main thing Barb Shot has going for it. It is the best Immortal race. W build a noob into Tychus Greymane. What spell damage is he reducing here? So W build a noob isn't just about damage reduction necessarily, but it's mostly about the movement speed. And if this were conditional, right? If once this broke, you lost the movement speed, it'd be one thing, but it's just for 3 seconds. So, I don't know. It didn't do a lot this game. Haben is also a player who pretty much always goes the same build on every hero he plays, though. So. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think a lot of players, especially non-competitive players, like if you're practicing the game 40 plus hours a week, start varying up your builds to match what's actually going on, right? But if you're playing just like a few games a day or whatever, you know, if you actually want to improve the game, narrow your hero pool as much as down, and even more than that, narrow your build on that hero to like one build, because then you're always practicing the exact same thing and you're eliminating variables. It takes a lot to be good at every build on a hero. Why does Wildheart go for boss at 9 minutes? This happens. This question happens pretty much all the time. On doing a video on how to use contradiction to figure out what build is good for what situation sounds pretty fun. Contradistinction. Not bad. So, Wildheart or Diamond Hands has lost the game. This game is lost. It's not actually over yet. And you should never give up until Korra is dead, because there's always a chance to come back in HOTS, despite the meme, no comebacks to mechanics, 6.5 out of 10. But on Sky Temple specifically, if you're down, let's say 2 forts, they're down 3, but let's say if you're down 2 or more forts, the realistic chances of you winning the game are near 0, especially competitive. The one major comeback mechanic you have is boss. You have to do boss, and you have to win the boss. And then 5 minutes later, you're probably going to have to do it again. The average number of comeback bosses that need to happen in a game where you're this far down is actually like 2.5. So if this game goes to 24 minutes and they get this boss and then go to the next boss and then go to the boss after that, Diamond Hands has a chance. Not a good chance, but it's a chance. Thanks, Calcleve. I appreciate that. So there's an argument to be made here that Wildheart just gives this boss. They just give the boss. And if they just give the boss, then they clear it, they lose a fort, they're still up 2 full forts. That's a pretty good position to be in. Like, why do they even need to fight it, right? I don't think... And they don't even like have insane positioning here, right? Like Roger doesn't walk all the way around here. Haben is coming in from this side. Diamond Hands does spawn the tornado correctly, so it is a little bit awkward to go in from this side. So they're doing that same thing we saw earlier, right? I didn't like, where we're forced to funnel in through the stroke. And you can make an argument they're not actually trying to fight here. And I would actually make the argument that they're not trying to fight. Because I think if you're trying to fight, you position better and don't all come in through this exact same choke. You try to come in from multiple angles and you commit immediately because they're down a talent tier. And you don't posture up too hard. You just go up just far enough to see the boss's health. By the way, Beetles at 1 would have allowed him to do this because he could have used the Beetle at 1 to scout the boss pit and never had to leave the bush and then just backed up. Because the Beetle would have aggroed on the boss. And they have the Wisp anchoring this this flank, right? So they kind of already have vision of the boss. They don't really need to step up with their physical bodies either. So they're really just waiting for this Hogger flank. And again, you can make the argument that Haven went a little too early. But I think they're just trying to see where the boss health is at. They're not necessarily trying to force the fight. If they were 100%, we're going to force this fight no matter what, I think they would have positioned a little differently. But then this flank happens. And now there's no chance that Diamond Hands can come back in this game. Because they lost the boss fight, and they're already down structures, and this is the only comeback mechanic on the map. So it's the risk versus reward. If Wildheart wins that fight, they've basically won the entire game. There's just no chance that Diamond Hands makes it back at this point. Actually, basically 0. Whereas if Wildheart gives the boss, they lose a fort, they're still up 2 forts. So it's, the high side is you basically win the game. There's no chance the enemy team can come back. The low side is if you die, maybe they get the boss. Maybe they, as a result of getting the boss, maybe they push and get a whole keep because you're dead and you can't defend. And the medium, so the worst case scenario is you're still ahead, but now they have win condition. The medium scenario is you end up 2 forts up, and the best case scenario is the game is over. Lucio has seen such high priority in the season's drafts, but in this series got past the first pick, first ban in 2 separate games. Would you chalk this up to a draft gaffe or potentially a reassessment of the meta by Diamond Hands? I think it comes down to which teams have insane Lucio players. If your team has a Lucio player that you're like, that guy's insane, we don't ever want to give him Lucio, then you're going to be like, Also, some teams might feel like they have a handle on how to counter Lucio, and so they are letting him through voluntarily. No hero is uncounterable. Some heroes might be very difficult to counter in terms of how you have to play the game or how you have to have a draft in order to beat them. And you might not feel like you have enough practice. You might also feel like you just don't know how to counter a hero, and you ban that hero. It's pretty simple. So I don't think Lucio's priority was different. I think with Mason Blaze subbing in, Diamond Hands probably took the chance that Mason Blaze is not the most insane Lucio player of all time. It didn't work out for them. Speaking of which, next question is Mason Blaze role swap for the series in healing. How well do you think they performed in the position? Mason Blaze did okay as a healer. I mean, if your team has a Yasuo, I didn't say that. There's lots of good Lucio players in CCL. Even if Yasuo was the best one, there's other players who have Lucio basically perma-bans against them. Diamond Hands looked quite clean this season up until this series. Do you think there was a single major factor that you could point to that made their series one-sided, or a collection of many smaller things? Diamond Hands has played GG, who literally everyone has beaten. They've played Storm, who up until this weekend, literally everyone had beaten. And they played Sim, who has literally not won a map. You can say a team looked clean, but when it's a top 3 team playing the bottom 6, 7, and 8 teams, they're going to look clean. It's not a result of them being, insane. This was their first really challenging match, and, the game sometimes looked close, but to be fair, Wildheart was playing with a sub. So Diamond Hands probably has a little ways to go. And that's the end of those questions. Chili Mountain versus Simplicity. Let's go. Would D.Va have been a better pick than Zool for double soak? Almost anything would have been. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about Vikings comps. If you have a competent Vikings player, the enemy offlaner will never be allowed to mount because Eric will always go up and auto them once when they're mounting, and then they're just not allowed to mount. So heroes that don't have mounts are frequently the best offlaners into Vikings specifically because they can't be mounted. If you're into a good Vikings player and you do have a mount, you should just never try to mount. Bear tried to mount a lot this game. It did not work out for him. Also, Vikings aren't necessarily the best at dealing with just straight up pushing, so you can make an argument that Zool should have just run it down top and just started hitting the wall. Zool's not the best hero at just hitting the wall. D.Va is substantially better at doing that, but D.Va is relatively weak right now. Her last round of nerfs were a little much. So you think Oryx E can't too? If you're free to use the Oryx E to rotate, that's totally fine. And I can actually point to HCC examples of that, where Leorix just always used E to rotate, knowing they would get dismounted. I think I even have a game where there's a Korean Leora who's using it into an Abathur because he knows there's always going to be mines on his rotate, so he just E's for his rotation instead of mounting. But yeah, anything that had wave clear and didn't have to mount would have been better. Just purely for the double soaking question. And Zul is a very gankable offlaner in general. I don't think this comp can really gank Zul. Like, Tracer's not going to gank Azul just because of Tracer's relatively low damage throughput. You're not going to be able to break the shield unless Zul just is outright shoving the wall, which is why Zul couldn't just outright shove the wall this game as well, because Tracer can rotate up, get the Brightwing Z, and then you can just get run down through the entire length of the lane. Also, body blocks exist. So I don't know what they could have picked there, but it was not Zul. Zul was a atrocious pick. Not to be mean. How 5-head is the Artanis level 1? And that's all I have to say about that. I'm just hoping that was a misclick. I usually prefer to be like... I usually prefer to assume top-level players misclicked a talent rather than picked a talent that was so obviously wrong. Okay, 30k versus Oxygen. How much better was Blaze Bot than Copen? It was substantially worse. The thing is that stacks don't even have a bad win rate like on ladder, and I think a lot of people give you stacks in a ladder environment, and then you scale in the late game, that's fine. People aren't going to give you stacks in competitive. You can never assume that. So that's just a bad assumption to make for any competitive player. But also it's BOE. Like, amateur opponent would have done a lot that game. Our win condition this game was to set up lane advantages and then look for fights, which you can't do when you're offlaners in a bot. So substantially worse. Substantially worse. How would you rate evaluate the Thrall pick from 30k from a theoretical draft angle? I mean, the Thrall is really hard to kill. So Thrall has, like, no good macro. Right? Thrall has no good macro. You pick Thrall because you have some condition for winning team fights. But it's really weird to me to be like, we're going to win a team fight. Oh, we have a Stitches, we're just looking for hooks to get gorge people. Like, these two picks together from a theoretical draft angle make no sense to me at all. I was actually really sad we lost this game. But, like, we do have we have a relatively fragile healer in Mouth. Sunder, especially on flanks, if Sunder reaches a Mouth is gonna die. Especially at 20. There's a combo you can do where you Sunder someone in and then you blink to them with Windstorm, root them, and because you have Alpha Wolf, and your E activates your attack speed, you just get an enormous amount of chunk on them, like, right away. And that's a problem. But we have Wisp to deal with flanks, so it's, I don't know. We honestly probably should have won this game if we had played better, but our early game rotations were so bad. They were so bad. And that set us up, to the mid game. We're also coming off of game 1 where the decision by CCL was something that obviously the team wasn't terribly happy with. And then in this game, we actually had a production pause because production lost the stream and had to bring it back up. None of the games felt good after game 1, and it seems like it kept getting worse. I can understand picking Thrall to win team fights, by the way. I just don't understand why it was picked with Stitches. I think that's a little strange. And I think I saw on a stream one of the players from 30k actually confirming that in hindsight they thought it was bad too. So auction back off bot keep and go for boss. Is it a mistake to leave keeps low like this? So it's a question of the Stitches timing. Bad Benny is somebody who plays this game. Oh yeah, Bad Benny's an insane tank player. I'm very happy to be working with Benny. I first made a name for myself in the HOTS community, writing a guide for tank play that was specifically looking at what tanks did in competitive and analyzing tank play. And so working with one of the people that I used to make some of those analyses has been very interesting. So it's not really fair to say we back off, because we don't do boss twice this game, I don't think. Am I insane? Yeah, we don't do boss twice this game. They do boss. So the only time we back off and do boss, all we had killed was a fort, and we didn't have anything else. Right? So if Stitches is this, our comp can only push into their comp pretty much when Stitches is dead or we have a significant wave advantage, and we only pretty much get a wave advantage when we. You consider Benny the best tank in CCL? I think Benny is certainly the best at certain aspects of tanking in CCL. You could make an argument that Benny is the best overall tank in CCL, and I wouldn't disagree with you. But I evaluate players on a lot of different levels. Yeah, you can't push into Stitches comps, because if you get hook gorged, that person is very unlikely to be saved. So, is he also the most handsome? My wife makes fun of me for this, but I actually can't tell if men are attractive or not. Like, I can tell if they have symmetrical features. I can do that. But I've never actually been able, like, I don't know if it's like just a cognitive blind spot or what, but I just like actually can't tell if men are considered attractive or not. And we've had funny conversations about it where I've been like, that guy has really symmetrical features and he has like, you know, defined jawline. Is he attractive? My wife will be like, oh no, that guy's not attractive at all. And I'm just like, I don't understand the criteria. I don't get it. Because I just don't. But no, it's not necessarily a mistake to leave keeps low. Either you can push or you can't. First Twilight Dream game in CCL, maybe just Season 4. Just Season 4. It's been picked before. Was this a good game for that ult? Do you think it's underpicked? I don't know if it's underpicked. A lot of Death Balls really benefit from having a bounce heal like Tranquility. Mouth is really good in Death Ball style comps. Tranquility, though, helps us to turn fights and secure kills in this game, which is really needed. We actually missed a kill in Urel because the Twilight Dream is like literally 2 frames late, and she managed to hold down her R button and get it off. And it was a post 20 kill. It would have made a big difference overall. So I think it was the correct pick. I don't know if the execution was always perfect. Why Deathwing? Deathwing is actually unbeaten in scrims. Deathwing currently has 100% win rate in scrims when we've been picking him. We haven't actually picked him in this exact scenario, but we thought it was gonna work, and then it didn't. If you could read the last pick of the draft, would you consider Deathwing? I actually think we still would have picked the Deathwing. I think the thing we change up is the Chromie pick. I think we change our 1-2. I think that was the biggest error in the draft. I actually think the Deathwing was not the problem that game. Why does it feel like drafts don't have a clear win condition, or is the team not playing around the existing ones? We didn't always play around our win condition perfectly. How come no rocks drop on 7 for Deathwing? Well, if we got into 20, he would have had all his level 7 talents. We do go Firestorm. Reduce the cooldown of Deathwing's landing abilities by 2 seconds. When Deathwing lands, he drops 7 meteors. So basically, the period after Deathwing drops, he's less vulnerable when you go Firestorm, because you can actually start pushing your buttons sooner. That's the trick. So this talent is actually essential for what we're doing, which is trying to land on people in the middle of fights and then win the fights. Just didn't work out that way. Why no Cubo Deathwing? Cubo Deathwing is something you can only draft if you have a lot of setup for it, which obviously we didn't. That was not the idea. That 3-second delay is an eternity when you're surrounded. I agree. Is the team tired when they play at second series of the day? Some players are and some players aren't. Hasu pretty much always stays up late. In fact, Hasu may actually be streaming like literally right now. But like Hasu plays on NA Stormlink sometimes during his stream, and he stays up to like 5 p.m. my time sometimes. Like for Hasu, it's fine. Yasu and Benny are very tired whenever we have to play second match of the day. So it's not everyone, but it is some people. Ideally for our roster, we would literally always play first match. That would be the ideal, but we don't make the schedule. I feel like Keeble Deathwing explains why it's crap just by watching them cast the ability. Keeble Deathwing was actually fairly meta in Season 1 of CCL and had a really good win rate. You just have to get really good. You have to draft certain things to enable it, and you have to get really good at coordinating where it's going to happen. Really easy one to do is Ice Wall. Ice Wall followed up by Blizzard will pretty much always work. How come pro Tychus players never go minigun auto build? They wouldn't say it's never, but basically Tychus is a burst hero, and auto build doesn't necessarily help him do more burst, right? The auto attack range can theoretically is peeling Deathwing OP. No. peeling is something that happens reactively, and anytime you're trying to do anything reactively with Deathwing, you're in bad shape. I feel like Deckard works really well with Deathwing because of the big CC, and Deathwing doesn't heal boss with squishies. That is in fact a combo that people do.
Choose a talent. Choose a talent.
I have to do this. 3 seconds.
Choose a talent. Choose a talent. Choose a talent.
How can I get him to stay here so I have vision? Also, does toggle cooldowns work on the thing? It does. I mean, you just go big pots. Why am I insane? It allows you to land sooner, so you're more likely to get the fall. Am I insane? Is it Death Drop? Oh, maybe it's Death Drop that does it. Anyway, the point of the build is it really gets really good at 20. Because at 20, you get all of the level 7 talents with Arrival of a God. It's very much a level 20 build. At 16, it gets pretty good with Gaze into Destruction. And then you have Arrival of a God, and you get all the level 7s, and suddenly everything works. But you have to get 20, which we didn't do. The other questions come from a Discord channel called Inside the CCL in the Nexus Schoolhouse Discord, where people can post questions throughout the week. I was thinking of Death Drop. So this allows you to land a little bit sooner, and you get the damage on the land, which is nice. And you can fly more often, which is really important because you're going to be taking a lot of damage. And then eventually you get Death Drop, and that helps. Minigun auto build. So the thing about minigun auto build is it doesn't necessarily increase Tychus's damage. Tychus is essentially a burst mage whose damage comes from auto attacks, if you want to think of him that way, because he has to be autoing. You know what, Legacy? The argument could be made that you should take Skyfall just to stall caps. I also could make the argument that every time you have a level 20 comp on towers, you should never cap your top right altar. Just let it go for as long as possible. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing stuff like that yet. So quarterback actually increases your damage, right? Press advantage only increases your damage if you actually need the range. Actually using the range takes a lot of practice. Dash is something you can take whenever you're like anchoring a lane, because it gives you a better escape tool. Also, it can be taken whenever you have something like Divine Shield or Sanctification, where you're going to be able to just run in aggressively and then stand perfectly still, because it allows you to position perfectly and then not have to move. Bigger they are, Insane Burst in the rhythm is kind of sustained damage. Master Assassin is the only thing that works with Odin. Pretty much everyone goes Odin, so Master Assassin is pretty much the default pick. Right? There's one game in Season 1 of CCL where we had, where Auction played Medivh Vikings on Cursed with Tychus Hypercarry, and Priz essentially did go full auto build, including Combat Tactician, and literally all we did was portal onto people, basically on CD, and kill them. And for that, auto build is like perfect. That's the ideal scenario, because you're just going to be able to just team fight all game long. I do think that for most people, they draft Tychus. He can't necessarily minigun conveniently or safely most of the time. So they go grenades, so they can also poke a little bit. It gives them a little bit more macro. And yeah. And I will answer the last question next week, which is what do I think the standings will look like before the gauntlet? Because week 5 is actually really critical to overall standings. That'll be it for Inside the CCL this week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. A little bit of a shorter episode. Not as many insane games this weekend, with detailed answers necessary. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Remember, this is a stream where we never lose, we always win, or we learn something. Learning is always a win. Have a good night, everyone.